Hi, and welcome back to Animals 2 by 2, where we take a week-long look at different animals. Today is our second day of the week-long, and we are learning about worms this week. Some lesson objectives and standards that you should know by the end of the week is to be able to observe the structure and behavior of red worms, little earthworms, observe the structure and behavior of the night crawler, which are big earthworms, compare how red worms and night crawlers are alike and different, communicate those observations of structures and behaviors of earthworms, and make observations of the natural world and know that they're descriptors collected using your five senses. And as always, you should be able to raise questions about the natural world and use appropriate references. What you're going to need for this lesson, just some pencils, crayons, markers, a pen, whatever you're comfortable using, and just some paper to take notes or even draw pictures. I find that drawing some pictures helps you throughout the week to kind of relate back to what we were talking to and talking about. So that always helps you visually see what's going on and be able to remember that more clearly. Of our vocabulary. We're going to look at the word burrow, and a burrow is just a hole or a tunnel dug by a small animal, especially like a rabbit or in this instance a worm, and they use it as a dwelling or a way to move about. Red worm, a red earthworm used in composting kitchen waste and as fishing bait. So that's a pretty typical type of worm. So the earthworm or the red worm it's just a really typical type of worm. We're going to look at a segment, and a segment is each of the parts into which something is or may be divided. So like a little section or it is sectioned off. An earthworm is a burrowing worm that lives in the soil. Earthworms play an important role in the aerating and draining of the soil and burying organic matter. So while we think that typically that worms are not that important, they really are when it comes to gardening and growing our vegetables and dealing with our waste. They really are quite important to the environment. So once again, this week our investigation is on big and little worms. So we have our little red worm and our big European night crawler, and we're just going to be looking at the two different worms and then comparing those at the end. Like I said before, I want you to be able to draw or write some notes about it so that you can compare back to them later in the week, or when we go to compare the two, you'll have that in front of you, so you'll say, oh yeah, that's right, I remember the red worm did this, or no, the night crawler did this. Okay, so earthworms. They're members of the ringed animal family, and they're fairly a simple life form. They're put together from a number of disc-like segments that are stuck together, like a long, flexible roll of coins. Earthworms have no internal skeleton like a fish, no hard protective exoskeleton like an insect, and no shell into which they can withdraw. Worms are flexible, elongated bundles of muscle efficiently designed for life underground. The characteristic wiggling or wriggling of the earthworms is accompanied by or accomplished by the contraction of two kinds of muscles. When the short muscles that circle each segment, like lots of rings on a finger, contract, the worm gets thinner and longer. When the long muscles that connect all the segments contract, the head and the tail are pulled towards each other, and the worm becomes short and fat. Depending which end of the worm is anchored, the worm can move along the surface of a ground or through its burrow effectively in either direction. The head first or the tail first. Okay, so we're going to look at earthworm organs are quite different from ours, making it possible for them to live their very different lifestyle efficiently. Earthworms have 5 pairs of simple hearts that pump blood through the body. They have no lungs Instead, the blood flowing close to the worm's surface absorbs oxygen and releases carbon dioxide directly through the moist skin, called the cuticle. For this reason, earthworms can live for some time in the water if the oxygen supply is adequate. If they don't drown per se, they may suffocate if the oxygen content is low. This is why worms leave the soil and crawl out on the sidewalk during a heavy rain. They are seeking oxygen. Earthworms are not adapted to feed in water, however, so they would starve to death in due course. Instead of a nose, ears, and eyes, earthworms have a nervous system throughout their bodies that control actions in response to environmental stimuli, such as vibrations, heat, cold, moisture, light, and the presence of other worms. However, they have no brain, so worms do not ponder their lowly lot in life, nor do they plan a strategy for obtaining their next meal or crossing the sidewalk safely. Like all animals, earthworms have effective strategies for begetting their own kind. With earthworms, it's not a matter of boy meets girl, but rather a simple matter of worm meets worm. All worms produce both egg and sperm, but they cannot fertilize their own eggs. Mating is still a necessary part of reproduction. Mature earthworms have an enlarged band some distance from the head. This enlarged clitellum plays an important role in reproduction. In mating, two worms approach each other nose to nose. With their bodies touching, they slide past each other until their heads are a bit past the clitellum. Both worms pass sperm through an opening located between the head and into the temporary holding receptacle in the other worm. The two worms separate, and they secrete a liquid that solidifies into a flexible tube. As the tube lengthens, the worm backs out of it. Soon the tube covers the front part of the worm. The worm lays a few eggs inside the tube, deposits some of the stored sperm, and withdraws from the tube, leaving the eggs and sperm inside the tube. The ends of the tube pinch off to form a cocoon, and the whole thing shrinks to a tidy package about the size of a fat grain of rice. The cocoon is left alone, sitting on or just under the surface of the soil. The worm continues to produce cocoons until the sperm is used up. Cocoons are durable and can overwinter in cold climates and can wait out hot, dry spells in an arid environment. After 3 weeks, the ideal conditions or longer, the cocoon opens and out sallies the next generation. Earthworms feed on decomposing organic material, mostly vegetation, from the surface of the soil and within the soil itself. In the process of burrowing and feeding, they process tons of soil in a typical pasture or garden, improving the quality of soil for plants and other animals. There are some 1,800 species of earthworms worldwide. Some are tiny, no more than 2 centimeters at maturity. At the other end of the scale are the Australian giants that average about 2.5 meters in length. And the record holder is a South African gargantuan measuring 7 meters in length. Not to worry, the largest earthworm in North America are the common night crawlers, which can reach the length of a little more than 30 centimeters. Stay tuned. Come back for our lesson 3 where we'll do some more investigating with worms. Thanks for joining us.